God be the Lord. All right, let's get this. It's important. So the reading this morning is out of Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 16. An account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. And Judah the father of Perez and Zahara by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Aram, and Aram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife Uriah, and Solomon the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam the father of Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph, and Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, and Joram the father of Uzziah, and Uzziah the father of Jotham, and Jotham the father of Ahaz, and Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah the father of the Messiah, Manasseh, and Manasseh the father of Amos, and Amos the father of Joseph, and Jehoshaphat the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Salathiel, and Salathiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abihud, and Abihud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor, and Azor the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Eliab, Eliab the father of Eliezer, and Eliezer the father of Mathan, and Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called the Messiah.
Yeah.
For God's people.
Man, there was a reason for that long list, and it wasn't just entertain Dustin. It is amazing. We had that long list for a couple reasons. One thing, as he read the list of names, you might have noticed there were 4 women mentioned in a long list of men. We're really going to say a lot about those 4 women this morning. But before I do that, I have to tell you another very important lesson for people who really care about the Bible. We get asked all the time, are you a Bible-believing church? And by God, the answer is yes, we are. Absolutely. And we know our Bibles. And to know our Bibles means we have to know that this beautiful genealogy you just heard has groups of 14 people. It omits 3 different kings during the period so that the groups would be all 14, because 14 is a number of completeness, and it shows the parts from before Babylon to after the Babylon captivity to King David, and then from King David to Jesus, and it wants you to show that the timing for Jesus' birth was perfect, was just perfect, prepared by God. So if you say, I take my Bible literally, you are really going to run into trouble, because it was never meant to take the Bible literally. Never, never. The original people who wrote it down, who brought it to us, did not take their Bibles literally. They understood what their Bibles meant because they, like us, were Bible-believing people. Okay, so that's one thing you need to know about that list. And the next thing you need to know, if you would like your brain to explode, we're not talking about it this morning, but if you're interested in exploding brains, go to Luke chapter 3. There's a genealogy for Jesus in Luke chapter 3. This is why we don't take our Bibles literally. They are not the same. There's some overlap, but one glaring difference is Joseph has a different father in Luke than he does in Matthew. So all those Facebook memes that say to the teacher, Matthew, Luke, and John, you're going to have to go to the principal's office because you've obviously been copying from each other. Well, they didn't copy too much. So you need to know those pieces as background, that this genealogy Dustin just waded through so beautifully was meant to tell you that Jesus was born at just the right time. I mean, it really seems like everything was wrong. Oh my word, it was dangerous. They had to travel. There was no midwife on hand, no room, no nice guest room, scented candles, none of that. There was a little animal poop and some pleasant animal sounds, but that seems like the wrong time, right? But what the genealogy shows us is, it was the perfect time. And in our time, oh my word, these are perilous times as well. And a lot of us are worried sick about what's happening in our world, particularly what's happening to vulnerable people. Because with global warming, the people who live the most precarious existences by the sea are the ones whose homes are going to be flooded and wiped out first. The other thing we worry about is our hearts get broken again and again as people fleeing disaster from South American countries are coming to our country, trying desperately to reach safety, and we're ripping families apart. Babies, nursing babies taken from their mothers and caged. We're doing all of that, and as we enter Advent, we have to remember that that precious holy family that we recall and we remember were just like those vulnerable people. They were living on the edge. They didn't have enough, and as the Christmas story goes on after Christmas, after the wise men, you will find that their lives were threatened as well. So before Matthew's gospel gets to Jesus' birth, we hear that the timing was perfect. Even though it was precarious, it was perfect. And the other thing we hear in a list of men's names, and some folks have counted up how many times women's names are used in the Bible, and I can't remember that number, but I assure you it's not very many. Not very many times at all, but right here in Matthew, you hear 4 women's names mentioned. And we have to know these women so we understand the message they bring us in Scripture. First thing we need to know about these women is, you know, they were really uppity women. They were all women who dared to speak up and speak their truth at a time when women were not encouraged to have any power whatsoever. Women's purpose was pretty clear. You could bear a child and you could have sex with kings, and that was pretty much it. Other than that, boy, the line for you was very narrow. And so the first woman mentioned is Tamar. She did not walk a very narrow line at all. She did not have much power. She married into Judah's family. You can read about her in Genesis. She married into Judah's family, and Judah had her marry his oldest son. His oldest son was not a good guy. He was evil, and so Genesis reports that he got killed off because he was so evil. Judah doesn't know this. Like most parents, he thought his kids were awesome, but was not. And he dies. So then, the rule they have is that the second son, it's called a Levirate marriage, was supposed to have intercourse with his older brother's wife so that she'd get pregnant and have a child. So there wasn't much incentive for him to have her get pregnant, because if she had a child, what would happen is her child as the oldest son then, grandson of Judah, would inherit half of everything. And all the other brothers would get is, however many there were, a part of what's left of the half. It wasn't looking like a good proposition to the brother, so, okay, the kids are gone. So they have intercourse, but he withdraws before he ejaculates. They don't usually say that part in church, but that's what happened, so that she won't get pregnant. And that's evil too, right? So he gets killed off because he's an evil person and he wasn't honoring the Levirate tradition. He wasn't providing an heir to his brother's widow. So he dies. Judah only has one more son, and at about this time he's concluding this woman is bad luck. So he says to her, my youngest son is still too young, so go to your father's house, live as a widow, and as soon as he's old enough, I'll send him to you. And he's thinking to himself, no way, is that ever going to happen? So she's living as a widow in her father's house, not free to remarry, because she's just supposedly waiting for this kid to come along. In the meantime, she has no home of her own. She has no inheritance, no power. She's just hanging out at her father's house, and they may even, I don't know what the family was like. The Bible doesn't tell us, but they could very well be thinking rats. Another mouth to feed. We thought she was successfully launched. So there she is hanging out. She's seeing this third brother get old enough to be able to father a child. He's not showing up on her doorstep, and she thinks, I'm sunk. But she's not, because this woman refused to be crushed by the situation in which she found herself. She had no rights, and she took rights. She went, her father-in-law, she heard, after her mother-in-law had died, went off to this sheep shearing festival. There was always a lot of drinking. And so she knew when he came back, he'd be a little bit tipsy, and this would be a good chance. So she pretended to be a prostitute. She was not, but she sat beside the road pretending to be a prostitute. When her father-in-law comes along, she says, hey, honey, and they make a deal to have sex. He's going to give her a goat, but he doesn't have his goats on him. And she says, that's all right. I will accept your staff and your cord and your, there are 3 signs, signet. So the symbols of his power, he gives to her temporarily as a sign that he's really going to come through on the goat. And they have sex, and Judah goes home. And he says to his servant, okay, I owe this lady a goat. And so he tries to deliver the goat. Well, they can't find her anywhere. And the servant comes back, says to Judah, look, I asked around a bit, but I didn't want to create a sensation. I didn't want to say why I was looking for her. She can't be found. She's disappeared. And Judah says, oh, well, we tried. Life goes on. 3 months later, somebody comes to Judah and says, that daughter-in-law of yours is playing the harlot. She's pregnant. She's supposed to be living. And so he says, that's it. She's got to be burned. That's the penalty. And so they order her to come forth to be burned at the stake because she did this terrible, sinful thing. And so Tamar takes the symbols she's got, she wraps them up, and she sends them to Judah with a message. The person by whom I became pregnant owns these things. Judah, to his credit, oh my word, this is like amazing. He says out loud, she's right. It was me. She did the honorable thing, and I did not. I should have sent my son to her, and I did not. That was the law. I broke it. She's the honorable one. So, of course, she's not burned at the stake. And, of course, the child she has will become my prime heir. And she has twins, thus showing that God, really, twins are special. Showing that God had new sons to replace those evil brats he lost. And so, this woman, who could have been obliterated by cruel circumstances, didn't have a lot of good options, but she figured out a solution, she made it work, and her name is recorded in Jesus' genealogy. Why? Because people who don't have power, people who do things you might think, well, that was a slimy thing to do. How dare she do that? God is on their side. God is on the side of people who will not be crushed, who insist on their rights, and her name is right there for us to read. And the next one, well, she was a real prostitute, Rahab. That's the next woman. If you read about the Battle of Jericho, there she was. She was the one who helped the Israelite scouts be able to escape so that then Jericho could be conquered. And the deal they made with her was that if she stayed in this one section of the whorehouse, that she and all her family would be safe. If they went out, too bad. And so they did stay there. They had to tie some ribbon so that the soldiers would know she was safe. And so her family was preserved, and after they won over Jericho, she went with them. Later fell in love with one of the Israelite men, married him, and she became the mother of Boaz. That's all down there in the genealogy. Rahab, that woman who, first of all, was a foreigner. She was not part of the Israelite people. Second of all, everybody knew she was a prostitute, and she married into an Israelite family and had Boaz. Does that name Boaz ring a bell? It should, because Boaz winds up marrying Ruth, the next woman who's named. And when Ruth comes along, Boaz is touched by how kind Ruth is to her mother-in-law. You know that beautiful, where you go, I will go, your people will be my people. We say it at weddings, but it was really for those two women. Ruth was the daughter-in-law who lovingly went with her mother-in-law, helped her when she was poor and had nothing to her name, risked going to this other country, and Boaz sees how kind she is to her mother-in-law, and that touches his tender heart. I wonder why Boaz had a tender heart. I wonder what made him care about outsiders, about people who were different, about people who were judged. What do you think might have affected Boaz when he was growing up? It's significant that even though Scripture tells us Boaz is really wealthy, he's not married. Now, wealthy men in those days were snapped up like that, but his mother, remember, was a prostitute. So you can just hear all those other Israelites saying, no daughter of mine is going to marry that son of a you-know-what, right? So he's older, he's rich, he's not married, and along comes sweet Ruth. And he doesn't take advantage of her. He makes sure she gets all the food she needs for herself and her mother, and he warns his servants to make sure that no one molests her, to keep her safe. And so Naomi, the mother-in-law,